My name is Evadne Whitmore, and at 70 years old I've learned how to disappear in plain sight. A simple dress, a quiet smile, a seat near the back. These have been my armor at family gatherings for decades. Tonight, at my son Damon's wedding, I thought I had chosen wisely again a navy dress that fit comfortably, my grandmother's pearl necklace, and a pair of shoes sensible enough to stand through the endless photographs. The Reynolds estate was the sort of place where money showed itself in every brick and blossom. Chandeliers glowed through tall windows, and an orchestra filled the gardens with Mozart, while waiters circled with trays of champagne. It was beautiful, I'll admit that, and it made me feel even smaller, like a visitor in a kingdom where I did not belong, when Damon brought me over to meet his new wife's family. I held my breath and braced myself for the usual polite smiles. Clarabelle's parents, Robert and Paula Reynolds, were already surrounded by well-wishers, both of them radiating the kind of ease that comes from old wealth. "This is my mother," Damon said, drawing me forward. Then, with a grin that carried too much nervous bravado, he added, "The fat pig we've had to put up with." The words struck me like a slap. Laughter rippled around the circle, brittle and sharp. Clarabelle tittered behind her hand. Even Paula's jeweled bracelets chimed as she laughed. I stood frozen, heat rising in my cheeks, my body anchored by shame. Damon looked pleased with himself, as if a cheap joke could make him seem taller in their eyes. I wanted to shrink into the carpet, but the pearls at my throat reminded me to keep my chin high. I had survived harsher words, survived worse than ridicule. Still, the cruelty of hearing it from my own son pierced deeper than I expected. Then the laughter began to falter. Robert Reynolds, tall and silver-haired, had gone very still. His gaze locked on me, not with amusement, but with something closer to alarm. His smile thinned, and the color drained from his cheeks. "Evadne Whitmore," he said quietly, almost to himself. "It's you," the music carried on. But the air between us tightened, as though the chandeliers had dimmed just for that moment. Robert's voice cut through the chatter like a blade. "My name," spoken with that note of disbelief, made the laughter around us falter. Clarabelle blinked between her father and me, confusion knitting her perfect brow. Paula, ever the socialite, recovered first, her laugh ringing out a shade too brightly, as though volume could smooth over tension. "Robert, darling, don't be rude," she said, touching his arm with a hand heavy with diamonds. But I saw the stiffness in her shoulders, the way her eyes avoided mine. Robert didn't look away. His expression shifted from surprise to something darker, as if memory was catching up to him. I knew exactly what he was seeing, a conference table in a glass tower in Richmond. 3 years ago, when his company teetered on collapse, he had expected another faceless corporation to take it over. Instead, I had sat silently at the far end, letting my attorneys speak while I kept my presence as small as possible. I had worn the same pearls that now rested against my throat. He hadn't thought twice about me then, just another widow tagging along. Perhaps. Now recognition dawned. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as he replayed the moment when he signed away Reynolds Holdings. Clarabelle tried to laugh. "Dad!" "You must be mistaken. This is Damon's mother, not some investor." But Robert wasn't laughing. He studied me with a sharpness that made my pulse thrum. I kept my face calm, though inside my chest the old fear pressed in, the fear of being seen too clearly. I had spent 15 years cultivating invisibility, letting others believe I lived on a pension and memories. Tonight, in one careless introduction, the mask slipped. Paula's smile returned, brittle as glass. "Well," she said, raising her flute of champagne, "we're all family now." Her tone suggested the subject was closed, though her knuckles whitened around the stem of the glass. I inclined my head politely, but I felt the ground shift beneath me. Power, once hidden, was no longer mine to guard in silence. Robert knew, and from the way his gaze lingered, he would not let this knowledge rest. Sleep never came that night. I slipped out of the dress and hung it carefully in the back of the closet, then sat at my small kitchen table in the apartment I'd called home since Silas passed. The room smelled faintly of old books and lavender detergent. Familiar and safe, but even here the echoes of laughter followed me. I poured coffee, though it was past midnight. The bitter steam cutting through the silence. Damon's words, the fat pig we've had to put up with, ran circles in my head, each repetition landing heavier than the last. The pearls lay coiled on the table before me, a silent witness to everything. I touched them absently, remembering how my grandmother had given them to me with the promise that dignity was something no one could steal. Yet tonight, in one careless sentence, my own son had tried. By morning, I was still at the table, the pot long empty. Damon arrived unannounced, his tie loosened, his face drawn. He paced the narrow kitchen as if it were a cage. "Mom, what happened last night?" His voice cracked between frustration and disbelief. Clarabelle's father kept looking at me like I'd missed something huge. He pulled me aside, asked questions about Dad's patents, about you. Why would he think you were involved in business deals? I kept my hands folded to still their trembling. Damon had always been blunt, never patient with half answers. But before I could speak, my phone buzzed against the tabletop. A message lit the screen. "Lunch tomorrow. Family matters. Clarabelle." The words were dressed in courtesy, but I could feel the edge beneath them. Family matters meant control, strategy, negotiation. It meant they had been talking all night, weaving conclusions and plotting their approach. Damon caught the flicker of the text. "What does she want from you?" I slipped the phone face down. "We'll see tomorrow," I said quietly. But my chest tightened. Clarabelle was not asking me to lunch. She was calling me to account. The question that remained was whether I would speak first, or let her write the story in my silence. The text from Clarabelle lay heavy in my pocket all morning, but it wasn't her voice that filled my head. It was Silas's. I could almost hear him humming under his breath, the way he always did when a problem consumed him. He was an engineer through and through, restless hands sketching diagrams on napkins, notebooks, even the backs of receipts. In 2010, after months of late nights and stacks of circuit boards, he filed a patent for a battery management system that stretched a phone's life far longer than its competitors. "It's just a small fix," he told me, grinning like a schoolboy. But sometimes small fixes move the world. 2 years later, a tech company in Austin paid $25 million for it. I remember the look on Silas's face when the contract closed. Relief mixed with disbelief. We sat on our porch in Charlottesville that night, holding hands, talking about college funds for Damon and maybe a quiet retirement. We agreed to keep the truth from Damon. We didn't want him spoiled by numbers too big to understand. Let him build his own life. Silas said, "Money can protect, but it can also corrode." That first windfall was only the beginning. Silas had an instinct for undervalued opportunities. He studied markets the way some men studied weather. Together, we learned to diversify safe stocks at first, then bolder steps into real estate on the city's edge, then renewable energy when the tide began to shift. When Silas died suddenly in 2015, I thought the work might die with him. Instead, grief sharpened me. Managing the portfolio became a way to keep his voice in my ear, his discipline in my hands. I studied balance sheets late into the night, asked hard questions, and forced myself to make decisions with the calm he had always carried. By 2020, the numbers had grown almost beyond recognition. One of those choices led me to Reynolds Holdings, Robert's legacy company. It was failing under his debts, but its bones were strong. Through a shell company. I acquired it outright. Now. As Damon looked at me across the breakfast table, suspicion in his eyes, I wondered how he would see it if the truth came out an act of sacrifice, or a betrayal carefully hidden in plain sight. The glass house glittered in the noon sun, its glass walls catching the bustle of downtown Charlottesville. Inside, the tables gleamed under white linen, every place setting arranged like a promise of sophistication. Clarabelle had chosen it carefully expensive enough to set the stage, public enough to keep tempers in check. She was already seated when Damon and I arrived, a slender figure in a cream designer suit that could have paid a semester's tuition. Her hair was swept back. A magazine spread come to life. She stood, air kissing me before gesturing to the waiter for $1,000 Bordeaux. "Now that we're family," she began, her voice syrupy but firm. "I think we should talk about structure. Families thrive when they plan together." She slid a folder across the table, its embossed cover already smudged with her fingerprints. Inside, neat charts and legal drafts laid out her proposal, a family trust, governed equally by 3 votes hers, Damon's, and mine. Damon shifted uneasily in his chair. "Clarabelle," he started, but she pressed on. "This ensures transparency," she explained, eyes glinting with ambition. "We make decisions collectively. It protects everyone's interests." I studied her calmly, then let my gaze drift to Damon, whose fingers tapped nervously against his water glass. He looked younger than his 32 years, caught between loyalty and bewilderment. Closing the folder, I folded my hands over it. "Clarabelle," I said softly, "tell me something. Do you love my son? Or do you love the idea of him?" Her composure faltered. The practiced smile wavered, eyes flicking toward Damon as though for rescue. For a moment, the clatter of dishes and hum of other diners filled the silence she left behind. Damon cleared his throat, but no words came. I sat back, letting the weight of the question hang where her rehearsed lines could not reach. The wine arrived, its ruby liquid catching the light, but the taste had already soured. Across from me, Clarabelle forced her smile back into place, though her hands betrayed her, trembling slightly against the stem of her glass. Damon's discomfort deepened, and I knew the fracture between them had only begun to show. James Sullivan's office overlooked the courthouse square, a paneled room lined with shelves of thick financial manuals. I had sat across from him many times before, usually for quiet reviews of investments, estate planning, tax strategies. Today, the air carried a different weight. He removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose before sliding a folder toward me. "You were right to ask me to dig. Evadne. Clarabelle has been busy." I opened the folder. Inside were invoices from Aguilar Investigations, a private firm known for discretion. The dates matched the weeks leading up to the wedding. Thousands of dollars poured into surveillance, corporate research, and background checks. "She hired them to look into your holdings," James said flatly, cross-referencing shell companies, tracing patents, even combing SEC filings. I turned the page. Mortgage records on the Reynolds estate glared back at me, 80% leveraged, with interest payments swallowing their cash flow. Their investment accounts had been bled nearly dry to keep up appearances, dinners, travel, a facade of wealth without foundation. So their comfort sits on borrowed time. I murmured. James nodded. "Exactly. And with your purchase of Reynolds Holdings, Clarabelle's inheritance disappeared. I suspect she sees your fortune as her replacement plan." I slid my own folder across the desk. Within it, copies of the PI invoices, bank printouts of Clarabelle's sudden new credit lines, and most damning, a transcript of a call she'd made to a former roommate. In it, Clarabelle spoke openly of marrying for stability, of looking for a man whose family had resources. James raised his brows. "You've been thorough. I learned from Silas." I said, "Never enter a meeting without every page in order." I closed the folder with deliberate care. The humiliation from the wedding still burned. But I would not walk into the next round empty-handed. Clarabelle thought she was playing chess. What she didn't realize was that I had been moving pieces long before she stepped onto the board. Now the question was not whether I had evidence. It was how I would choose to place it on the table. The conference room at Sullivan & Hale smelled faintly of polished wood and strong coffee. A long table divided us like a border. On one side sat Clarabelle, her suit the color of wet steel, and beside her, a lean man with sharp features who introduced himself as Mark Vance, counsel for the Reynolds family. Damon sat stiffly between them, his eyes darting from face to face. Clarabelle wasted no time, for the sake of unity. She began, sliding a sheaf of papers across the table. "We propose the establishment of a family trust. An initial contribution of $15 million would secure everyone's future, provide transparency, and prevent misunderstandings." Her tone suggested generosity, though her gaze glittered with calculation. Damon shifted uneasily. "Clarabelle," she cut him off with a smile. "This is about protecting your mother as much as us." I placed a hand on the papers, then pushed them gently back. "I won't be contributing to any trust," I said, my voice steady. "Not one designed to hand control of my life to others." Mark Vance leaned forward. "Mrs. Whitmore, refusing such an arrangement may create unnecessary conflict. Shared governance is the fairest solution." "Fairness," I replied. "Opening my own folder requires honesty." I spread out documents, invoices from Aguilar investigations, records of Clarabelle's new credit lines, and the transcript of her recorded call. The words sat between us like stones looking for a man whose family had resources. Clarabelle's composure cracked, her smile tightened, and a flush crept up her neck. Paula, seated quietly behind her daughter, pressed a hand to her pearls. Her complexion drained of color. Robert remained silent, his eyes fixed on the evidence with the weight of recognition. Damon read the pages slowly, his jaw tightening with each line. The silence grew heavy until even the hum of the air conditioner felt loud. I folded my hands and looked across the table at my son. Clarabelle's lawyer cleared his throat, but no words came. In that stillness, the line was drawn between ambition dressed as family and truth laid bare. Now it was Damon who had to decide on which side he would stand. The papers lay scattered across the table, the silence stretching so taut it seemed to hum. I gathered them neatly into a stack, slid them back into my folder, and lifted my eyes to Clarabelle. "You have 72 hours, I said evenly. "Withdraw any complaints, end your investigations, and accept a settlement, $5 million. In exchange, you and your parents will sign an agreement non-disclosure, no contact with me, and no further claims on my assets." The words dropped like stones in a pond. Damon jerked back in his chair, color flooding his face. "Mother, you can't be serious. You're putting a price tag on my marriage." I kept my gaze steady on Clarabelle. Her nails tapped once, twice, against the polished wood before stilling. $5 million, she repeated slowly, as though tasting the number. The flush had not left her cheeks, but behind her composure I saw the wheels turning calculations of debts, of opportunities, of how long appearances could be maintained without fresh money. Paula let out a strangled breath. Robert still said nothing, though his hands gripped the arms of his chair as if bracing against an unseen blow. Damon pushed the folder toward me. "You can't buy people out of our lives. This is obscene." "Obscene," I said softly, "is being investigated in my own home by the woman who swore to love you. Obscene is debts hidden beneath borrowed jewels. This is clarity. Mark Vance. Silent until now. Leaned toward Clarabelle, whispering in her ear. She nodded faintly, then straightened. Mask of elegance reassembled. "We'll need time to review the details," she said, her voice thin but controlled. 72 hours, I repeated, rising from my chair. After that, the offer disappears. What follows will not be pleasant. Damon stood too, but his eyes darted helplessly between us, between the woman he married and the mother he had humiliated. The room held the weight of a contract that was more than paper. It was a mirror, and soon it would show him who Clarabelle truly was. The 3 days that followed crawled with an uneasy quiet. Damon kept his distance, torn between two worlds, while I waited in my apartment with the phone never far from reach. When the call finally came, it was not from Clarabelle or her lawyer, but from Damon himself. "Mom," he said, voice low and ragged, "I need you to come." He met me at their townhouse near the university. The house still smelled of new paint and staged furniture, as if they had moved in only to impress guests. Clarabelle stood by the window, arms folded, her expression polished but brittle. Damon's jaw tightened. "I just want one answer," he said to her. "Did you marry me, Clarabelle, or my mother's money?" The silence stretched. She opened her mouth, closed it, and looked away. No denial. No defense, only the quiet calculation of someone cornered. Damon's shoulders sagged. That's all I needed. He walked to the table where a manila envelope waited. Settlement documents already inside. Clarabelle's lawyer had been efficient. She signed with a graceful hand, as though it were just another social contract, then slipped the pen back into its case. By evening, the funds were transferred within a week. Damon filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Clarabelle moved back to her parents' estate, her silence at that moment echoing louder than any confession. The following Sunday, Damon asked to meet me at the same church hall where the wedding rehearsal dinner had been held. This time there were no chandeliers, only folding chairs and the hum of a weak air conditioner. He stood before a handful of family and friends, his voice carrying without music or laughter. "I humiliated my mother in front of you all," he said plainly. "I thought I was making a clever joke, but it was cruelty. She deserved respect, and I gave her shame. I can't undo it. But I need you to hear me say I was wrong." His words were steady, though his hands trembled at his sides. When he finished, he turned to me, eyes wet, waiting not for applause, but for mercy. Spring came to Charlottesville with a softness that seemed to wash the slate clean. By then I had left the apartment and settled into a modest brick house just outside Monticello's gates. The place was nothing extravagant. 2 bedrooms, a small garden, but from my porch I could see the rolling hills Silas always loved. It felt like starting over on my own terms. I spent my mornings at the University Foundation office, where the paperwork for the Silas Fund slowly took shape. It was a small endowment, designed to support young engineers who had bright ideas but lacked resources. Each time I read a proposal from a student describing the machine or circuit they dreamed of building, I felt Silas's presence, steady as ever, guiding the work forward. One afternoon, Damon arrived with someone new. Her name was Sarah, a history teacher at the high school. She had kind eyes, the sort that linger on your face instead of drifting to your jewelry. She shook my hand warmly, then laughed about the potholes on the road leading up to my street. Not once did she ask about investments or companies. She only wanted to know if I liked to read. I set out tea in the living room. Damon watched me closely, perhaps wondering how I would react to this gentle intrusion of hope into our lives. For the first time in a long while, I felt peace seeing him beside someone who valued him rather than his imagined inheritance around my neck. I wore my grandmother's pearls, They had hung heavy on me at the wedding, a chain of humiliation. Now, in the quiet light of my own home, they felt different no longer, a weight but a crown of dignity, proof that respect, once reclaimed, cannot be taken away again